Our God, our God, we thank you for your goodness and allowing us to be here, for we know that it is truly only by grace and mercy we are enabled and empowered to be here this day. We thank you for your spirit of love and justice, your spirit of peace that surpasses human understanding. We ask, oh God, that as we meet this day, that you would be in our midst. You would anoint this fellowship, that you would move it from a meeting into a movement, oh God. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. And we'd like to welcome all of you, those of you who just joined us. This is the program designed for you, with you in mind. We come to speak on a wide range of issues, on faith issues, on issues of justice, issues of righteousness and redemption. It's a great honor to have with me brother, my friend. We come all the way back. Those of you joining us in Liberia today, we want to welcome you to our broadcast. We are here each week bringing you inspirational engagement with leaders, builders, educators, and people who are in the struggle for freedom, for equality, for justice. And it's a great honor to have with me my brother. I've already commissioned him, I call him Doctor. He's a PhD student at Drew, and he's the senior pastor all the way up in Buffalo, New York. We come a long way, like I said, and Dr. Cook, let me welcome you. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and begin with a word of conscience, a word of engagement, a word of enlightenment, a word rooted deeply in the fight for freedom. Those African brothers and sisters are listening to you tonight, and it's actually a distinguished honor to have you with us. Speak to the people of Liberia. Julian Cook, you have a lineage, you have a history, you come from the South, and that South has a history with Africa.
Yes.
Talk to me tonight for a person who is listening to you in Liberia. What is the word of encouragement? The word of encouragement in the 21st century. Taking back from history, the history of our ancestors, and in this 21st century, trying to make Africa what it ought to be.
I think the word of encouragement is an experiential word, an existential word, and that word is we're still here, right? And that's everything else, as far as I'm concerned, moves from that presupposition. I mean, the reality of our suffering worldwide, and by our suffering, I am particularly speaking about the suffering of folks who are connected to the African diaspora. That suffering must be acknowledged. It cannot be ignored. And it is a suffering that is global in many respects. But there is a sense in which we who are alive and remain have a great deal of responsibility. And we are still here, which means we get a chance to not only tell the truth of our suffering, but to begin and continue the cultivation of our joy and of the solidarity that flows from our joy, of the power, of the resistance that flows from our joy. So I'm excited about the opportunity to still be present in the land of the, my former pastor used to say, in the land of the dying, on my way to the land of the living. But I know that many people will use the phrase in the land of the living. Whatever way you want to put it,
Yeah,
you're still present, which means you still have power,
that's right.
however limited that power may be.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you know, it's been a quite a difficult past. It's been a difficult 2020.
Mhm.
All right. And now we are in mid 2021. You know, I was just watching the news this morning, and now the conversation is around trying to wear masks again. And from a pastoral standpoint, for you in Buffalo, uh, what has it been for you as a Baptist preacher in the Buffalo area, coping with this virus and all of the challenges associated with it in the midst of race riots taking place, demanding for justice, and with this transitioning taking over, where Americans had to go to elections last year in November, and then eventually things to some level have shifted a little. And a friend said, "Well, I can sleep a little now." Like, even in the midst of everything that is happening. But talk to me. How is it we are so as a minister of the gospel?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a great question. It's been a painful season, but it's interesting. It's been a bittersweet season because it's as much as there has been pain, there's also been a number of opportunities for innovation. And so part of my responsibility as a pastor has been, in many respects, not only guide the institutional church through days that it has never seen in the form of this global pandemic that nearly shut our facility and physical in-person meetings down for about a year and a half. But it also has meant pastoring past the institution, pastoring the folks who make up the institution
That's right.
through the incredible loss of loved ones. I think I have performed more funerals this year than I ever have at any point in my ministry. Which also means that has taken a toll upon me in many respects. Many of these are which we have not begun to discuss at all in many respects. When we think about essential workers, clergy being a part of that crowd of essential workers who are responding not only to the needs of the dead, but also to the needs of those who remain in the wake of the dead. So that has been incredibly challenging, and trying to help folks to, first of all, as a Black pastor, right? So that's compounded when you deal with the issues of race and the demographic that I'm serving. I'm serving a population that experienced, and I'm speaking of us in Buffalo specifically, the zip codes that I serve, the zip codes that my parishioners come from are the zip codes that experience the highest infection and death rates in the entire Western New York region,
Yeah.
which is really something. So it has meant, number one, recreating in many respects funeral and what we call in Black Christian church spaces homegoing rituals in ways that honor those who are deceased, promote healing for those families, but also observe the safety regulations that were in place, right? So what does it mean to guide Black families through not being able, in the early days of the pandemic, a lot of people don't even remember this, but in the early days of the pandemic, some people weren't even having services in a facility. They
Oh,
were encouraging you to do graveside memorial. So I still have members who are mourning the fact that their mother or father or children who have been members of the church their entire lives did not receive final rites from the church in the ways that they had to do a graveside service that was 10 to 15 minutes. What does that mean for us as we think about Black humanity and the ways in which our rituals and any culture's rituals around death and moving forward in healing have been disrupted by this pandemic, and not only disrupted, but also reconstructed in light of this pandemic. So that's one area. I think also guiding a church through 100-year-old church, might I add, through a pandemic. I mean, our church, this is the longest, of course, of many churches, but certainly for our church, had ever gone without physically meeting. So we were live streaming every week. What does that mean to keep people engaged? What does it mean to keep a significant portion of my membership who doesn't even use the internet regularly, right? So I have folks who have become masters, like 80-year-old women who have become masters at the internet, who before thought computers were like a thing of the devil, were like a thing of the devil, and now it became the main means to which they were able to remain connected to their community. So that's what it's meant to pastor a pandemic, to pastor incredible pain, but also to be a steward of incredible opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's right. And I've just, as you were speaking, I've been reflective of the fact that there've been, just as you indicated, a considerable number of challenges we've had over the past. I came here in August, and it's been one barrier to the other, but the restrictions that were in place, and even up to now. So most times people will not bring, the body to the church
Yes.
after they were cremated. And I was just wondering, especially for us, that is not part of our tradition, but
Right.
within my area, current area of assignment, a bulk of the people were cremating, and they would just call, well, Pastor, we want to do this. Can you meet us at the gravesite?
That's right.
We'll have memorial maybe the next time. So right now, memorials are lining up.
Yeah.
As we go along in this new year, but there are people who died since last year.
Absolutely. And then to move from that, right? I mean, we weren't even done with that. We were still memorializing droves of people, and then to have this conversation introduced about the ethics and theology of a vaccine, right?
Yeah.
So now it moves from the level of just mourning to now how do we do preventative care, right? So how do I get a community where there is a great amount of information, number one, misinformation, excuse me, number one, right? And then number two, where there is a general distrust of the medical establishment for very viable historical reasons.
Oh, yes.
General distrust of the medical establishment. And trying to convince this community that they ought engage, or even if you're not trying to convince them that they ought engage, that they ought to consider engaging this virus and engaging this conversation, to get them to think different ways about this as a way of not only saving themselves, but as a way of preserving community as well. It's pastors have had to do a lot over this last year, without question.
Yeah, it's been a tough time. Talk to me a little bit about your own faith journey. Mm-hmm. All right, how as you sit here today, as you speak to the audience that are watching us throughout the world and in Liberia in particular, how did you come to the faith? How did you come to Christ? And share a little bit about your softened history for those there are many Liberians who have connections from the South. And that history goes back over probably 300-400 years.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about that, about your faith journey and the path from the South to now all the way up in Buffalo, New York, where you speak to us from.
No, it's a great question. So I was born and raised in a Baptist church on Chicago's South Side. My grandparents were migrants from Greenville, Mississippi. They had been born sharecroppers. And of course, there is a history with the state of Mississippi, particularly the Greenville area and Liberia, right? So there were a number of people who actually went from Greenville, Mississippi to Liberia and lived their lives there after emancipation. So it's cotton country was the area in which they were raised. They picked cotton in the early parts of their lives. My grandfather picked cotton every day. That's where they were. That's where they were born and raised, and came to Chicago in the 40s, as a part of that great migration. But arrived in Chicago like many migrants, and found that the religiosity that they had practiced in the South was not accepted in the cosmopolitan northern centers. And so there was this phenomenon that sociologists and historians talk about in urban spaces known as the transplant church movement, where essentially these droves of Black people from the same communities in the South who were migrating in very large numbers to places like Chicago, Harlem, Buffalo, and Philadelphia, and Detroit, they would take their churches and basically transplant them from the South to the North. And so True Believers Baptist Church was the church that I grew up in. And if you went around that church and asked most of those people in the early days, it's different now, but when I was growing up, if you went around that church and asked most of them where they were from, they were all from Mississippi, Louisiana, Mississippi and Louisiana. Everybody was from Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. It was this, and it was particularly Mississippi, they were from this general region of Mississippi, and the flavor of church that they brought from the South to the North was very clearly birthed out of a particular experience. And so that's the church in which I was reared, which you and I have talked about that often, that even my flavor of ministry often has a tinge of the South, of what one might see as Southern church culture in it. And that's because that's the flavor of church in which I was raised. So when you ask me, when did I meet Christ? I think I was baptized when I was 7, which was that was when I made my public profession, as we say in the Baptist church, my public profession of faith. But I cannot remember a time when I was without Christ. I mean, that has been a major part of my life from a very early age, and not just in church, not just as far as like institutional church involved. I'm talking about tying my connections with the community. It was very clear from my grandparents that your faith as a Christian had something to do with the community at large.
Yeah.
With the upbuilding of community, in particular when it came to dealing with issues of Black community and Black health. That Christian faith played a major role in that. And so it was only natural in that respect, growing up in that type of environment where questions were being asked about the political destinies of Black people in relationship to Christian theology, that I would emerge thinking that Christian ministry was an option for me. I had a wonderful pastor who was incredibly dynamic, who I saw do ministry in very creative ways. And so I wanted in very many respects to be like him. I also think, this is really important, and I'll close with this. Growing up on the South Side of Chicago, the examples of, there were many examples of manhood and masculinity, men that I saw, right? And some of them were very positive. Some were also negative, just as they are in any community, right? It wasn't unique to my experience there, but there was a particular experience there. So I think one of the things that most impressed me was here was a man who I saw engaging his identity, not through not in violent ways, right? Not in ways that we would now associate with hyper-masculinity in some ways, a toxic masculinity. He was engaging it through words. I had not seen many men in my early life who were able to communicate in beautiful prose the way that he was. That stood out to me. And I said, I want to be able to communicate in this way, right? Because we're, in many respects, some of the examples, not all, but some of the examples of manhood I saw was that we did our talking through violence, right? We did our we do our talking with our fists, right? That was a part of my life. It wasn't all of my life, but it was one of the representations I saw. But in this particular Black male pastor, and I want to emphasize that, I saw an example of a man who used his words in powerful ways. build a community. The only people I had ever seen do that in my community were women. And so to see a man to do that, we would call that in the academy, to see a man queering those rigid gender lines was pretty amazing. I had never seen that before. And I decided that's what I want to do.
That's what I want to be. Yeah.
I want to learn how to use language in that way.
That's right. That persuasive nature of always reaching out. You can still be a man, but be a man and a dad, or in a realistic way that you can also come across as someone who is appealing and always open-minded and can listen to what others have to say as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The African continent is a pretty huge continent. And a lot of times when I talk to people on the other side, especially in Africa, the question is always, why are Black academics, African-American academics, people of the African diaspora, why are they not engaging much more with the continent, much more visiting the continent, much more beginning to build bridges, building institutions, and building relationships, and strengthening that human capacity of the continent. As we speak, from a standpoint of religiosity, Africa is gravitating probably, in the next 25 years towards a majority Christian, domination, Latin America and Asia. The church seems to be dwindling and slowly, some would call it, dying a slow death in the developed world. As we sit and speak, I know you have not visited any part of the continent yet, and we've had these conversations, deep conversations on campus at a university. What can you say to somebody who's listening to you today in that part of the continent in terms of that strategic engagement that we all need in solidifying and building the continent and creating avenues and opportunities as the Chinese and others as out now scouting and taking huge sums of land and parts of the continent?
It's a great question. I think part of the issue, right, is the reality of colonialism. What colonialism does in many respects is that it teaches us, it schools us and disciplines us into believing that epistemology or knowledge is only generated from certain areas, right? And that there is nothing of note. There's nothing that one might want to think of as far as resources that come from particular places. And so academia is still very much affected by that. I mean, someone might even say infected by that sort of disease deformation of the moral imagination. And I don't think that. I think in many respects there's this long history of Black academics actually resisting that. But it's true that also the institutions that we live in, because they are structured very often by these sort of white supremacist epistemological frameworks, right? Knowledge frameworks and knowledge claims, they still do not see Africa as holding holding valuable resources, right? As far as knowledge is concerned. And I think some of that is a result of the incredibly painful, destructive history of colonialism, that some of those histories we can't even reach anymore, right? I think the other reality is that we haven't faced the fact that I heard one, and I won't say this person's name because I didn't get their permission to, but I heard one academic say to me once, I never felt more American than when Africa, she's Black American, but she said, I never felt more American than when I went to Africa, right? That there's so many of us as Black people have even been inculcated with these sort of imperialistic logics that have framed and shaped our lives, that when we go to the continent, or even when we're not, but we're learning about the continent, we are still working out our own biases and tensions as folks who have been schooled in white supremacy, and very, very often. So I think there's that, and I think when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking about Sadia Hartman's book "Lose Your Mother," a journey on the transatlantic slave route. Just an amazing story about what does it mean to live as an African American, and to engage the continent as one whose legacy is one of being ripped from it. Is a really important question. So I'm interested. So when you ask how can we be engaging, I think the dialogues that you and I have been able to develop between our churches. Number one, right? You coming to my church and helping my church to understand what a reciprocal relationship looks like between Africa and African Americans is a great example, because in the history of Black religious involvement in Africa, it has been very missional, right? Black folk coming over from Black American churches doing missions work in Africa, building the school, doing this, doing that, but not always seeing, which doesn't help because it only reifies this notion that Africa does not have resources to therefore offer the African American too.
That's right. That's right.
So I think what you're doing what we've been able to develop, and when I think of people like, which is not perfect, when I think of people like Charles Blake and Bishop Blake, who the former Bishop of the Church of God in Christ, and what he was able to develop, where there's this sort of reciprocity, where we need to learn. So many Black Americans need to learn about Africa because our knowledge of Africa has largely been interpreted through the white lens. It has not come through Africans and our engagement with Africa.
Yeah, that is true.
So that's where I think it starts. You coming to my church and preaching to a bunch of African Americans who also ain't never been to the continent, who want to go but need a doorway. And you became that doorway so that our congregation could have a conversation and say, yeah, it's time for us to stop doing all of this, just giving money and thinking that we're doing something, without also recognizing that Africa has something to give us as well.
So true, so true. Yeah. And that is why we have this mutual understanding, and we're hoping and praying, looking forward to the end of the pandemic.
You got them ready, man. When you came to visit and you preached, they were ready.
Yeah, and hopefully when this pandemic is over, we are hoping that we can work in that direction to strengthen that relationship. Those of you who are joining us, we're having a conversation with Dr. Julian Cook. Reverend Cook happens to be the pastor of the Zion Baptist Missionary Church in Buffalo, New York. And we come a long way, all the way from Drew University, and we've had lengthy conversations, like Dr. Cook indicated. So in the not too distant future, our hope and our prayer is that Dr. Cook will be on the shores of Africa, will visit the continent, Liberia in particular, and we can begin to expand on this particular ideal in strengthening relationships, making sure that we all can deeply begin to tell our own stories.
Yes.
We can begin to direct the narratives about Africa, Africans. So we're looking forward to that. So if you just join us, we're having a conversation with our brother, our pastor. Just before we wrap up, since this is the first conversation that we are having, we stay in a state of a pandemic. We're in the second year, but probably a slight transition with a new administration. Talk to me All right. As an African American scholar, where are we in this period of transitioning from one administration to another, from race riots to the demand for equity in the streets, now to January 6th, to all of the debates taking place in the country, the need for government to invest in the well-being of the people. With a new administration now on the stage, how can you define where America is as an African American scholar?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you where I am and where a lot of the folks in the community that I engage are as Black young. I work with a lot of Black young folk at the college level, and then work with Black people across age ranges at our church. And that community, it is pretty clear to me that we are in a period of terrified resistance, where we are definitely still dealing with the prolonged effects of the trauma we experienced during the Trump administration. I mean, what it means to live under a dictator in many respects, who constantly uses social media as a means to issue hateful edicts. And for people to take that language seriously, and for us to live under that consistently, never knowing when something's going to come out, under that type of randomness, almost randomness and regularity, right, is incredibly frightening. And I don't think we've fully dealt with the terror that meant for us, the terror that we lived under as a result of that. But we're also seeing at the same time many folks amidst that terror rising up in resistance, right? And so I think that's the moment we're in now, as we're asking in many spheres critical questions about what it means for us not just to move forward, but what it means for us to engage the past as we move forward. And so that's where I see us. We are terrified, and because we have been terrorized in many respects. But we are also still resisting. And there are a lot of people, at least I know that sums up where I am at this moment. So I'm hoping that, although I don't exactly know what healing even looks like, I'm hoping that we will, I mean, because it's not like we woke up on January 20th and after the inauguration and all was healed and okay. No.
The long path.
It's a long, very long path. But we saw a particular type of mendacity for 4 years that I think is unparalleled. So how do we begin to engage in the type of healing practices that we need, while also recognizing that we are still very much walking around with the after effects of that administration?
Yeah, that's right. All right. So talk to me a little bit. I know you have a son.
Yeah.
Talk to me about family. How is that going? People listening to you. I know you're a family man. I visited you up in Buffalo. How is the family life?
Yeah, I think our family is doing well. My son, his name is Langston. He's 10 months. He is doing well. And my spouse is also doing quite well, which is very important because as she has spoken publicly about this, she had a very difficult pregnancy toward the end. And so his birth is definitely the culmination of many, many hopes and prayers. And he's a healthy child. And one of the things that I committed to, I was challenged by a mentor when he was first born. And I was talking about his birth, but then I started talking about all the things that were going on wrong with the world. And he just responded to me. He's a dad himself. He's a Christian social ethicist. And he said to me, man, don't you let anything take away the joy of that baby, though. Like, you need to live in the joy of that baby, because if you let this stuff, this white supremacy and all of that and I consider COVID-19 and its effects a part of that white supremacy. I just want to make that clear. If you let that take away the joy of that baby, then why do we exist at all? What is your work for? Because we exist for the joy and beauty of Black life. And here is a Black life that you're about to allow all of the suffering in the world keep you, that you helped to create, to keep you from realizing how wonderful he is. And so, after I picked my jaw up off the floor, after he said that and got myself together, it helped me to shift my perspective and to say, one of my first responsibilities is to acknowledge the Black beauty that is in front of me, and to celebrate that, and to never allow the terror that we're experiencing to keep me from cultivating who this young person is going to be. And so that's where I got that term for the first time, the notion of terrified resistance. Yeah, we're living in a moment of terror, but we are resisting, whether it be through the raising of a healthy young Black child, or being on the front lines of a protest. All of that is revolutionary work. And so, yeah, that's important. So he's doing wonderful.
Yeah, and that's part of the call
Yeah.
for ministers to always appreciate, deeply appreciate, first of all, their own history. Brother Mali always reminds us that you need to know, first of all, where you're coming from.
That's right.
To know where you are and what the future
That's
is
right.
to bring. There's a lot that we share in common. We are Black.
Yes.
And we come from the same area of learning, and especially at Drew University, where we met.
Yes.
Talk to me, for those who are listening, those who are watching. I have a lot of colleagues I've been talking to lately, and they've been in search. Hey man, look, we need to find a way to we need a president. There are lots and lots of universities are opening in Africa. But we will have that conversation at the right and the appropriate time. I know you're wanting down at Drew.
Yes.
Give us some insight. What are you studying at Drew University as you do your PhD?
Excellent. Thank you. So I am in what is known as the area, the discipline of religion and society. I work at the intersections of social ethics and African American studies. I am the student of Dr. Tracy West, who also works at the intersection of social ethics and African American studies. So what that often means is that I'm applying the critical lens of social theory, social ethics, philosophy, politics, Christian theology even. But I'm reading that always through the lens of African American studies and the critical engagement there. So I'm always interested in questions of race. I'm always interested in questions of gender and their relationship to the ethical claims make, right? So segregation in many respects, right, is an ethical claim. White supremacy or Black equality is an ethical claim that is framed by certain presuppositions. And so I'm always interrogating those presuppositions. And so that's where much of my work concerns. I'm engaging a number of scholars, a number of theories across several different disciplines to tackle those important questions. So it's important. Let me just add this, we need Black scholarship. And the reason that I say that is the more I am involved in intellectual inquiry and the development of scholarship, right? The more I watch that, the more I read it, the more I realize that white supremacy is supported by a logic. And so it is important that we have the development of counter logics that counter white supremacy as well, right? So there's always a desire to operationalize these understandings of race and supremacy and who's better and why they're better and so on and so forth, and to ensconce them in knowledge claims. So it's important that we also have alternative knowledge claims that resist the prevailing hegemonic knowledge claims. And so that's why the work of Black scholars is so important. We need Black scholars who are investing in revolutionary thinking, who are constantly interrogating the normative logics that are handed over to us.
Yep, that is quite true. And those who are listening, if somebody is in the Buffalo area, how do they find you? Where is the church located? Could you care to share that with our audience?
Oh, absolutely. They can come visit me in two places. Number one, you said it, Reverend. They can come visit me at the church. So come visit us at Macedonia Baptist Church. That's 237 East North Street, right here in Buffalo, New York. Our services are at 9:30 and then at 11:30. You can come right on and tell them that you are my guest, and they will work with you to get you to take your temperature and all of that, get your mask and get you ready to come in and visit with me. Or you can stop by my office at Houghton College at the King Urban Life Center, Houghton College East Side. That's 938 Genesee Street in Buffalo, New York. You can come visit me anytime. I would love to see you and shake your hand and just thank you for engaging in this important conversation. And let me say to you, who you are, Dr. Thank you for always extending the invitation to this brother to connect with the continent. I have been eager to connect in even deeper ways. And as soon as you and I were planning for me to already have been on the ground there, but let's, as soon as we can, plan for me to really be on the ground there. I might not come back though. That's the thing I know, is that once I go, I might not come back. Because there's been this whole influx, as you know, of young 30-something African American. I'm sure you've read those articles.
Oh yeah, I've read them. I read
to Nigeria, Liberia, places like that, and deciding on the. I mean, I'm not just being funny. There's research that validates that.
Yeah,
folks who have gone for a visit and decided that they were not coming back.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. Well, I mean, that's where we're building. That's the reason why we're building this bridge.
Yes.
That we will engage the continent, and eventually that we will have you there. We're hoping that members of the Macedonia Baptist Church community can visit Liberia. I mean, the web has been to Liberia before.
Yes.
So
my wife has. Yes, that's right.
Talk to me a little bit before we wrap up about. I know you like to sing. Talk to me a little bit about music. That's one thing I also observe about the little time when I was up there.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
In 2019. Go ahead.
Well, some of that, as you know, is a part of my roots, right? I mean, I come from a tradition where a singing preacher is valued, right? I mean, that very often singing is a way of creating community. So before you get ready to declare the word, sometimes that word, as we know, if it's worth anything, sometimes that word is calling people to account. Sometimes that word is not always easy to hear. Sometimes that word is a word of healing or even a word of confrontation. And so one of the ways that we do that and create community to prepare in hearing that word is to engage in music. And so from a very early age, my grandmother sang, my mom sings, my sister can sing, my spouse is a professional singer.
Oh, yeah.
She has gone to heights unknown with her singing and sung all over the world, as you know. But I have a degree in music and was trained as an opera singer. But my first training came from True Believers Baptist Church. And so from time to time, I will still reach into that repository and bless the church, as they might say, with a selection. So, yeah.
Well, it's been quite interesting having you after a long time, but especially This is the first time in Liberia. We want to thank you for the time, for the knowledge you've shared with our audience here. And like I indicated to all of you in Liberia, Dr. Cook is somebody we are hoping to engage with on the continent, in Liberia itself. As we speak, we're laying some groundworks, making sure that we ourselves can visit next year. And then following that, we are hoping that a team from the Macedonia Baptist Church,
Right.
including Dr. Cook, will be able to join us. This bridge is intrinsically linked not only to the culture, but our heritage. And there's a lot we think we can do together within this particular context, creating avenues through which those who hold the future in Africa can have an opportunity to grow, to appreciate their culture, to
Absolutely.
appreciate their Blackness, to appreciate where they come from, and take advantage of the history and the resources that they have. And we can potentially collaborate with the incredible knowledge within the diaspora community to also engage with our brothers and sisters in Africa. Man, it's been an honor being with you today, and let's get closing statement from you.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for inviting me. I want to thank all of those who are listening, and I just want to encourage us to do it for the people. Let's do whatever work that we do. Let's do it for the people.
All right. Well, on that note, that's how we're gonna wrap up this conversation today. It's been quite interesting to have Dr. Cook with us. Julian Cook, he's the pastor, the senior pastor there at Macedonia Baptist Church in Buffalo, New York. I'm hoping that as soon as this virus to some level is under
Yes.
control, the irony is I was in fact checking just the other day, unlike when I was in Delaware, now getting to you in Buffalo is just probably 3 hours.
Yes, easy. It's
So
easy.
it's not as far as it was before.
That's
But
right.
thank you, man, brother. We appreciate you. We want to thank you for joining us today.
Yes,
And,
thank you.
to our viewers, our listeners who've been monitoring us, those of you in Liberia, we want to say thanks for watching, and we'll see you again another time. Take care, brother.
Thank you. Take care.
My regards to your wife, the little boy.
All right.
Hopefully we will be meeting soon.
Absolutely.
All right. God bless.
God bless.
Yeah. Bye-bye.